So I'm looking this over, and on the right-hand side, on the bottom, it's disappearing into invisibility. And at that moment, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, that's disappearing into invisibility. That doesn't make any sense. At that moment, I started feeling a very extremely low frequency vibration in my chest.
A Kodega is a guide and a storyteller, escorting you through the night, lighting the way, warding off thieves, ghosts, demons, and other oddities. Along the journey, his companions would often share with him the most curious of stories that he'd record in his codex. Perhaps you just might find yourself traveling with a Kodega and sharing one of yours. Click that like. If you're new here, subscribe and have the bell hit for notifications to stay up to date on all of the new content. Good evening, everyone. It's Rye here with Kodega's Codex of Curiosities. Always a mouthful, but it is what it is. It is what I picked. On tonight's episode, we are going to be joined with Don, and he's going to tell us some fantastic stories, some UFO experiences, and we will go from there. It's going to keep you very intrigued. Don has some great stories. Now, as for myself here, I just want to say thank you to everybody for liking, subscribing, watching the videos. It's really helping along. Things are really taking off. Now, if you want to support the show, I would love it if you guys could. The easiest one, and that's free to you, just share. Share the show. Share it with your friends, with your neighbors, everyone else, with your coworkers, family, by all means. Now, other ways to support the show is I have a Patreon. I have a couple tiers in there, and the links are all in the description down below. So check that out and support the show. Also, there is merch as well. I have shirts, I have hoodies, I have cups, you name it, I got it. If there's something that's there that isn't there that you would like, send me a message and I'll design something and make something. Also, I have an Amazon wish list as well. And if you're feeling really generous, you can always kick in and maybe send me a new mic, a new camera. What else? Yeah, a new soundboard. Let's take this show to the next level. Can always use your help. Now, also, so what else is new and exciting with Kodega's Codex of Curiosities? Well, we're throwing out some new lives. We're throwing up some bonus shows as well. So if you're only listening, you're going to miss it. So I want you guys to tune into the YouTube channel and check it out. I got a lot more episodes and content coming your way. Now, don't want to keep you guys waiting any longer, and I don't want to keep Don waiting any longer. Let's bring Don to the stage. Hey.
Hey, man.
Hey, Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I really appreciate you inviting me.
I really appreciate you coming on. Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm glad that you reached out and we had a little conversation and talking through email, and here we are.
Well, I've never done an interview before. Never been interviewed for anything. So it should be interesting to watch me stumble through it.
That is all right. I have interviewed many people, and I still stumble through it. So don't worry about having any mistakes or any stumbling. I do it often as well. So, Don, do you want to tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I guess for the last 4 years, I've been retired, which I'm kind of happy about.
Of course.
I spent about almost 30 years at Apple Computer. I was a systems engineer, systems programmer. and I ran the back end and the server farm for the website. I did cut out there in '95 when Gil Emilio was CEO, and I said, "See you later, guys." Went to Lockheed, spent about a year at Lockheed. Then I went to Motorola and spent about a year and a half there. And Steve Jobs came back, and I thought, well, I should probably go back. I have a feeling. So I went back, and I was put in the server group and the website group, and that's where I was until 2020. And in 2020, I said, well, it's almost time to retire, and since I'm working from my dining room table, this is a good opportunity to retire. So before that, I grew up as a musician.
As we can see behind you, all your collection of guitars.
Yeah. That was always what I wanted to do. I played in New York for a while in clubs, moved to Florida, and did some pretty good shows down there. We opened for Leonard Skinner, the original Leonard Skinner, when nobody knew who they were, and I didn't even know who they were. So that was pretty interesting. But I'm basically just a regular guy that had a couple of very strange experiences, and I just want to say that I have not figured them out, and it's been a very long time, like half a century at this point. So I've never gone into any detail one-on-one with anybody. I've written up the stories and released them in a very limited way. But I thought I need to tell the story because I want people who have had similar experiences, I want them to be able to compare and hear what I have to say, because I know when I hear other people tell their stories and they say things that rings a bell for me, and I see some kind of a common language or explanation or experience, that tells me something. I'm not sure what it tells me, but I just know that I'm not alone. And
that's usually a good thing. Yeah, it's that similarities to let you know that I'm not alone. Like I'm not. I wasn't the only one who's ever experienced this. There's others out there.
It's exactly true. So in that, I just hope that it might inspire other people to tell a story that they've experienced that they may have really not wanted to do for a very long time, and I can definitely relate to that. So, should we go into the one from 1971?
Let's do it. Let's dive right in.
All right. So I was living in Gainesville, Florida, and as I said, I was playing in bands, and had a girlfriend, lovely girl. She came over one day and she said, "Let's go to the Millhopper tomorrow." The Millhopper is a natural sinkhole. It's a geologic site just outside of Gainesville.
Okay.
At the time, it was not built up at all. If you look at pictures of it now on Google Maps, there's a lot of wooden walkways and things like that. It was not like that then. If you wanted to go to this particular sinkhole, you would have to shimmy down the the side and kind of get down to the bottom of it. And it was absolutely gorgeous. There was a waterfall, lush tropical vegetation. So she wanted to go. I had been there before. So she comes to my apartment and picks me up. We drive over and park. And it's during the week. It's a weekday, so there's virtually nobody there. I saw no one else. We pulled into the parking lot. Off to the right, there's some heavy equipment, bright yellow Caterpillar type earth movers, things that they use for the site, but no other cars. All right, good enough. So we start walking towards the main sinkhole, which is probably 300 yards, 400 yards from the parking area. And I stopped to light a cigarette. Pulled out the matches, pulled out the cigarette. I turned slightly this way to avoid the breeze so I can get the match lit.
Yep.
And as I'm lighting the cigarette, she says, I've never felt like this before, which absolutely made no sense because this was a completely off the wall comment. So I turned to look at her, and she is looking over my right shoulder with her mouth open and her eyes bug-eyed. And she rolls her eyes at me and as if to say, turn around and look. So I turned, and there is an object at about 25 yards away. And I absolutely drew a blank. What is this? I could not, it didn't fit any category of anything I had ever seen.
And you said 25 yards away.
Yeah, very close. I could have hit it with a baseball. Could have hit it with a strike. It was absolutely motionless. In retrospect, looking back at it, what it looked like the most that I've ever come across is one of the McCandlish ARV drawings, the Mark II. It had gracefully sloping curve to the dish. It had a center fuselage, I guess you would call it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And a port, an actual hatch.
Okay.
One hatch in the middle of it. And it did not have any cross bracing like the McCandless drawings did. It was just a flat gray slab. And I'm looking at this thing, and now my mouth is hanging open. And it's motionless. I cannot actually say for sure if it was hovering or if it was on the ground. I could not see the underside of it because it was tipped slightly towards me.
Okay. Like on a slight angle. Okay.
Yeah. I tend to think it was probably sitting on the ground or on stilts or something. Into invisibility. And at that moment, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, that's disappearing into invisibility. That doesn't make any sense. At that moment, I started feeling a very extremely low frequency vibration in my chest. You ever been to a drag race?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Okay, if you had a really good seat and when they hit the gas, you know what that feels like.
Unfortunately, I did not have a good seat, so I do know slightly what you're talking about, though. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it produced no sound, but the sound that I was hearing was through the vibration of my bones to my ears. It was actually vibrating my chest so much that that's what I was hearing. But
so it was almost like an ultrasound, almost in a way, or an infrasound. Sorry, an infrasound maybe of some sorts.
Possibly.
Okay.
I couldn't pinpoint where the emanation was from, but obviously I think I know where it was coming from. So I thought to myself, this is not good. Maybe I should take a step back. And at the instant that I thought that, the amplitude lessened.
Wow.
So I thought, this thing is reading me.
For sure.
So I did take a step back and continued to look this thing over. And there's a light on one side of the fuselage. I could not see the source of the light, but I could see it was very bright. It was brighter than daylight. This was like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning on a bright summer sunny day. And this light was definitely brighter than daylight. And it was it was emanating prismatic colors, was what I like to call it. So in other words, every color of the spectrum was just kind of scintillating off this light. So I'm looking at this and I'm trying to focus on the craft. Still no explanation of what it is in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the slope of that dish and the port, the hatch up there, I could probably walk right up to it and walk up the side of the thing and probably knock on the door. I actually did think that. Of course, I didn't do that.
Yes. I don't know many who would. I don't know anybody who would, but an interesting thought, though. An interesting thought.
Yeah, it is. And it in retrospect, I kind of wonder how that thought got there.
Mm. Okay.
So anyway, I continue to look at this thing. Now the girlfriend is still right here, and she's not saying anything. And I don't even recognize that she's there. My attention is completely on this thing. And from that hatch, I could feel that I was being very closely looked at.
Okay.
You know that feeling you get when someone is staring at you.
Yes.
And it was one of those, but it was like very intense, very intense. So I began to think, there's somebody in there. They can read me. And I need to be careful here. So now I'm focused on the light again, which is very bright. And it starts emanating rectangles, graphic rectangles, pure white outlines.
Okay.
Overlaid over each other, hundreds of them. And they're coming at me slowly. Now I have to mention, we were completely straight. There was no drugs or alcohol involved here at all.
Great question, actually. I mean, great statement on that one. Yes, because that was something thinking. I'm like, it does sound like a bit of a trip, like someone is on a trip, but this is,
yeah,
you're clean sober, nothing other than you just lit up a cigarette, and I don't even know if you've even smoked. Have you even smoked the cigarette yet? Have you still sitting there just let it?
I took one puff to get it lit, and then I don't know whatever happened to it. Tell you the truth, probably just burned off in my hand.
Yeah.
And other people have mentioned, oh yeah, the rectangles, man. Yeah.
Really?
No.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay, like I have not heard of rectangles before on any accounts yet. So this is a new one.
Yeah. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, this is hypnotic. This is absolutely hypnotic. I had read a few books on hypnosis at the time.
Okay. I agree with you. Actually, that was the first thing that came to my mind, was like, this is like don't mind the pun, 1960s, 1970s kind of like hypnotic kind of, they have the little swirly kind of thing. And that's exactly
similar, but much better graphics. These things were more real than real.
Wow.
They were that real. But like I said, they were two-dimensional, but they were stacked in such a way as they were kind of forming a hallway.
Ooh, interesting.
So I began to think, well, I should back up a little bit. There was one other telepathic communication.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was a telepathic communication, because at the time I knew nothing about UFOs, nothing about UFO lore. I knew nothing except music. Tell you the truth, I was 19 years old. And in my mind, loud and clear as day, there was one word that came across to me, and the word was abduction. It had no significance. There was no implied meaning. There was no emphasis on the word. It was just the word. And I stopped and I thought, well, what does this mean? I didn't do that. I didn't think that. I knew nothing about the abduction phenomena. Nothing. I don't even think it was a thing that was widely known at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I puzzled over that for a second. I knew what the word meant, and I knew what was happening with those rectangles. And I thought, no, this is not good. This is not good. So I figured, well, if they can read me, I can read them. So I started projecting this intention that I was not going to cooperate, that
Okay.
I was not going to get into some sort of a hypnotic trance by just kind of being complicit with it.
Yep. Yep.
So I kind of really projected that pretty hard. And at that point, these rectangles started reversing course and going back into the light.
Okay.
At that point, the girlfriend turns to me and she says, "Let's go."
Jeez. Was it right at that point when those?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I said, okay, sounds good. Let's do that. So we turned, started walking back to the car, kind of scared stiff. It's a very stiff walk.
Yes, I could imagine.
We didn't turn around and look. We got to the car. I turned around. I could not see it anymore. It was either because the elevation was such that I couldn't see it because the land was blocking it, or it had just simply disappeared. And that's the thing about it being there in the first place. It appeared in the space of time that it took to light a cigarette or just light a match.
Yeah.
It was not there 1 second, and the next second it was there. So
and no noise as well. No noise to cause alarm. You're just walking, smoke, light a cigarette because you stopped to light a cigarette, and no noise as well.
Yeah, that was definitely the sketchy part of it. Where did this thing come from?
Mm-hmm.
Because it would have been in our line of sight as we were walking in that direction. We would have seen it.
Yeah.
And since she's the one that saw it first, well, the thing about it is we didn't talk about it. We got in the car, we drove off, completely stunned, in absolute silence. Takes me back to my apartment, pulls up, I get out, she drives off, I go in my apartment, and I scratch my head for a couple of minutes, and I think, And I couldn't actually focus on it. I couldn't focus on the experience. I could not stop and think, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
In fact, before we got into the car, the question in my mind was, what the hell just happened? And I couldn't verbalize the question to her.
Wow.
So it was stunning, right?
To say the least.
Yeah. So the thing about that was I couldn't focus on it when I got home. It didn't seem significant, or at least it was so overwhelming that I couldn't entertain any ideas about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not particularly overwhelmed. I felt relatively normal. So time goes by. We continue to see each other.
Now, okay, just before we jump too far, speaking of time goes by, how long did this whole event take place? And you said it happened about like 10 or 11 o'clock. What time did you get home? Like, was there any time loss within that, or time dilation, or a constraint?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think there was any missing time. I think I got home. You know, it was a 10-15 minute drive. We got home in 10-15 minutes. Um, I didn't perceive that it was later than it should have been.
Okay.
I did perceive some time problems at that time standing in front of the thing. Um, and what was the other part of your question?
Sorry, but yes. So, what do you mean by time problems when you're standing in front of that thing? Like
Yeah.
time was standing still. It felt like, or
Yeah, the visual perception of the thing was a little bit out of place.
okay,
Um, like I said, it was a bright sunny day.
yeah,
It was undoubtedly a metallic object, but it didn't have a shine to it. So
okay.
it was kind of a medium gray with no reflective qualities. but the
And
surrounding
yeah,
but the
sorry, go ahead.
surrounding area of the craft itself appeared to be at dusk.
Interesting.
Yeah. And in all of my memory of it, it's always dusk.
Wow. That's really really intriguing. That I remember it being at dusk, even though specifically it was late morning kind of thing. And also you had mentioned that it was going invisible
Yeah.
on a certain edge, or where exactly was it
Yeah.
going invisible?
So on the bottom right side,
Okay.
where the curve, right,
Mm-hmm.
of the dish would have become where you would no longer see the other side.
Okay. Yeah.
At that corner, it was going invisible. It was actually, as best I can say, I could see through it at the bottom portion.
Incredible.
And I did notice that in that moment, and I again, no explanation at that moment.
Yeah. That is incredible. Okay. So now let's move forward to this time now where you've returned. You can't really think about it because you're like, did that really happen, or is that it really wasn't significant, or it was too significant to think about? um did you discuss it with your girlfriend after the fact?
That's the funny thing. We never discussed it. We saw each other for months after that,
Okay.
and never discussed a word of it. It never even crossed my mind to discuss it with her. Um, so, you can conclude that there was a block.
Definitely something was obstructing your memory to think about this, or to access how important of a level of importance this was, because it was. And then to even just to bring it up to talk to the person who experienced it with you as well, that's it's intriguing.
Yeah, that. Of course, I didn't stop to think about that during
Mhm.
that time because I didn't stop to think about it.
Of
But
course.
in retrospect, decades and decades later, I did stop to think about it.
Hmm.
And then I stopped to think, well, it's been decades and decades, and I still haven't talked about it.
Jeez.
So
Yeah.
about 2014, I had an interesting perception. Um, um, I was just sitting at my desk at home, and I thought, I should call so and so. Haven't talked to him in a long time,
Okay.
and went looking for a contact number on the web. And turns out he had died almost exactly a year earlier. So I thought, this is kind of coincidental, isn't it? Why would I think to call him after all this time of not having spoken to him at this point? that got me started on the whole track of trying to trace this memory back and get more detail out of it.
Okay.
So I had a little bit of experience with remote viewing.
Okay.
Some people may not be quite in sync with that, and some people may be very much in sync with that.
Do you
But
want
I
to
have-
give? Do you want to give just a quick, brief explanation of what remote viewing is for those who don't know what remote viewing is?
Remote viewing, in truth, is a psychic phenomenon
Mhm.
of being able to perceive, receive perceptics, receive data, receive visuals at a non-local location that you may or may not have been to ever, or for that matter, sometime in the past, where it's more than just a memory, it's an actual re-experiencing of the incident. Um, and, it kind of goes back to the whole, Stanford SRI remote viewing experiments with Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann and
Yeah.
a bunch of other people. So I had some experience with that by association. Not necessarily, I was not involved in the project. Never been in the military, all right? Never been in the intelligence community. All I was a guitar player at the time, right? But I was able to do that. And that's actually another story of how that came to be, which is kind of a lengthy story.
Yeah, we'll save that for another day, I think.
But I did remote view it,
Mhm.
and I did pick up some more information from the environment that I was able to corroborate on Google Maps
Okay.
of things that I couldn't see in the environment that I picked up that were actually there. More of the surrounding area.
Mm-hmm.
So my only question that was kind of burning to ask, now that I had this entity or whatever it was behind this hatch in focus, I said, "Who are you?" Isn't that a good question? Wouldn't you want to know?
I think that's one of the best questions. Yes, I think that's a fantastic question.
I mean, I didn't really care about the nuts and bolts.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't care about the craft. I didn't care about the propulsion system. I really wanted to know who.
Yeah.
And strange answer came back. Very strange answer. It came back as, "It's you." Now, what does that mean? It could mean a future you. It could mean the same species as you. It could mean consciousness is kind of universal as you.
True.
Um, or it could have been um, just me supplying the answer because I wasn't going to get one. I don't know. It's just speculation.
And I know I had asked this question, or I made this observation that possibly could it have been you, by your remote viewing, created this craft and invaded that area, not invaded, but been there by your remote viewing, like almost a circular kind of event, that being that was inside was you being the remote viewer watching yourself.
I did consider that.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that that's it. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Throw it in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, that's a logical assumption. That is possible. But bottom line, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's all I really got out of it. There were no other details that I could ascertain.
I think that's a very interesting response, though. Nonetheless, it is an extremely interesting response. it leaves a lot more questions than answers for sure.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing leaves a lot of questions.
Does it ever?
So I write up this story in 2014, 2015, something like that. I think I posted it on Reddit once, and few people said, "Wow, thank you." And I admit right off the bat, this one is kind of hard to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
But I have one that's even as hard to swallow as well. And
Okay.
if it were me listening to this story, if it were me trying to evaluate what this guy is saying, and what are the odds that he's either fabricating or completely off his rocker or whatever, I would question it. I would definitely question it. I would because there is no proof. We didn't carry phones around in 1971. We didn't carry cameras around in 1971. But again, we carried witnesses around.
Yeah, you did have you had a witness with you. And have you ever tried to reach back out to her to corroborate this?
I did. I tracked her down. She still lives in Gainesville.
Okay.
Actually, I filed a MUFON report.
Okay.
About 2014, 2015 or so.
Yeah.
And I talked to the investigator in Florida, and I said, would you want to contact her? I got her address. It's absolutely her.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, nah.
What?
Yeah. So you know what I did? I bought a subscription to MUFON, and I wrote to everybody on the masthead, every single name on the masthead. And you know how many responses I got back?
I'm going to say a handful.
Zero.
Sorry,
yeah.
That's disappointing.
Well, is it? I don't know. She's still in Gainesville. I wrote her an email. I said, you remember me. I hope you're okay. I hope everything's good. I see you've had a kid or two. And I gently reminded her about that particular day.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, would you be willing to talk about it? I didn't put any details about what I thought. It was just, that trip to the Millhopper. So I didn't want to associate any of my perceptions. Didn't want to leak that to her. I wanted her actual response because I have no idea what she thought. No response. Now, she's remarried,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's been a long time. And, you kind of can't blame her because it was probably traumatic for her.
It's true.
She came from a fairly traditional religious background.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a feeling maybe, her interpretation would have varied from mine. Whereas I did not come from any sort of a traditional religious background. So I did not have any of those associations. She might have.
Yeah, and around around those years too, there's a lot of stigmatism around any type of sighting, or like now people are opening up a lot more, becoming much more, free with discussing these types of events, experiences, and but then it was just keep your mouth shut, don't tell anybody, people will think you're crazy, and perhaps that mindset with those that mindset has continued on, whereas myself and the experiences I've had, when I was younger, yes, I was told the same thing, don't tell people, people think you're crazy. And I learned that too when I was quite young as well, when I had an experience and I told a bunch of people and I became the weird kid at school. So I kind of learned that myself. But now it's it's becoming much more open to talk about it. When I tell people what I do, that I host this show, people will open up to me. All walks of life will open up to me to tell me different types of experiences, and everybody has them, and they just want to release that, So hopefully, maybe she will come to a point where she needs to, start talking about it and tell like this really did happen, and this wasn't just something I wanted to forget about.
Don't know.
Yeah.
I think, well, I mean, at the time in 1971, there were no UFO encounter stories that I was aware of.
Yeah.
I think Betty and Barney Hill, what year was that? Was that
I
61, I think?
I thought it was late 60s, yes. And then there was the Travis Scott, which was 74, 75, I think.
Yeah.
That's the Fire in the Sky. But Barney and Betty Hill, I'll have to look that up here quickly. But yes.
Yeah, I was not aware of the Betty and Barney Hill story until probably the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the late 80s when I was able to have internet.
61. That was in 61.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this would have been 10 years later. So there was nobody talking about this stuff. There really
No.
wasn't. There were a couple of magazine articles, I think, when I looked it over, and that was about it. But I didn't have access to magazine articles. I had a turntable and a guitar amplifier. That's what I had, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't really any stigma involved. If I had gone to the group I was playing with and said, "Guys, check this out," they would have said, "What are you smoking? And can I have some?"
Yep. Exactly.
Because that just wasn't a thing back then, and it wasn't a thing for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there was a degree of blockage in the perception over the years. I think I always knew it was there, but I didn't feel like hashing it over in my head was going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see something that you absolutely draw a blank on, like I didn't even identify this thing as a UFO until decades later. It was a complete question mark, is what it was.
Yeah.
Until until I started to consider that maybe that's what it was. And when I saw the McCandless drawings, I said, "God damn it, that is pretty fucking close."
Yeah. Those are interesting, and I'll be putting those up on our during the show as well. So whoever's been listening and not watching, those drawings will be up for you to view, and you can see them.
That's good. Yeah. So I don't know. I fully expect people generally probably will question the story, and they should. They should question all of these stories
I could not agree more.
because there are some people that are just unfortunately just looking for attention.
Yeah, you know what? It's and it doesn't matter where or what. I don't want to say genre, but like any type of industry or topic. We'll say topic. There's always people out there who are just in it for the attention, and they will fake things, they will hoax things, they will tell stories and create fabrications, and they're doing it for attention. And it doesn't matter where you go, there's always one of them in the crowd.
Yeah, and that's not to to discount the possibility of some sort of a mental condition as well.
Yeah,
where it's beyond attention, it's hallucination. So anytime I hear stories of contact or encounters, abductions, close sightings, I really have to take into consideration who's telling the story and why.
yeah.
I think, for me, there's only one reason why, is because I know there are other people out there that have had similar experiences that have never said a word.
Mhm.
And they think whatever they think, that that it may have been some sort of a problem with them, or a hallucination, or
Yeah.
something that you just really can't bring to the card game and talk about. So for those people, I would say, think about it. If you have a real story and it's been kicking around in your head for a while, and you just didn't feel like talking about it would be of any value, it's probably better to just talk about it, you know, take the hits from people that don't believe you,
Yeah.
but realize that you might actually benefit someone with a similar experience.
Exactly. Yeah. You might benefit someone, or you yourself might benefit by getting it off your chest and realizing that there are people out there who've had the same experience, and you're releasing this, but also you're putting together a piece of a puzzle, and we have no idea what that puzzle looks like right at this time. And I talked with another lady earlier, a friend of mine, and we are saying that everybody thinks these puzzles are all separate, but we're actually believing that they're all connected. There is a much larger picture here, and a lot of these things are connected. And so if you're coming forward and telling your experience, you're helping us to try to piece this all together.
Exactly. There was yeah, I kind of listen kind of carefully to the talking heads that
Mhm.
are the personalities on the subject,
Yes,
and I have opinions about
we all
this.
do. We all do. But yeah, go ahead. Let's hear your opinion.
But there was one that I heard, Gary Nolan particularly.
Okay.
There was one interview he did where he described an encounter that he had, and he used some of the same descriptions and the same reactions as I had. Um, it was so close. I actually thought to myself, he probably read my Reddit post.
Really?
Yeah, but it was different. It was different, but parts of it were so similar. I could have actually legitimately had that thought. Um, there've probably been a few others,
Mhm.
but on the subject of the talking heads, I kind of look very skeptically at people who are trying to gain credibility, by their credentials or their experience. Um, so I have to really filter out what I can't validate, you know,
Yeah.
and try to extract what it is that they're actually getting at that I can relate to. There are a lot of things that I cannot relate to because I haven't experienced them.
Fair enough.
Doesn't mean that it didn't happen to them. It just means that it didn't happen to me,
Mhm.
and consequently, I put a question mark on it.
Mhm.
I think I think that's necessary for critical thinking. I think the UFO community should do a little bit more critical thinking.
I agree.
And it's
I,
not
I
a it's not a popular opinion, right?
It is not. It is not. Critical thinking is something that is far, far. It is far away from many people as well. Um, I believe we all have to approach things level-headedly, and I like your approach. It's like, just because I didn't experience it doesn't mean that that can't happen. It doesn't mean that that's not legit, but it wasn't my experience, so I can't say one way or the other. And I think that's a critical way of thinking of this as well, because there's a lot of people in other communities, and I'm not talking UFOs, we're talking cryptids, where it is, I saw this creature, it was flesh and blood. So by my experience alone, it has to only be flesh and blood. Even though other people have experienced other things, I'm going to deny all their experiences. You can't do that. I understand that all you experience was flesh and blood, but you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. You have to be able to say, my experience was this, but it doesn't mean that this isn't true either, or could be true. Actually, that's a better way to say it.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. And I think over the years, in considering, was this thing able to directly manipulate my perception and my thought and my memory and my experience? If that's the case, that's pretty powerful.
It is.
And if that is one of the attributes that this phenomena has, that might be going on more than we know. And, if I were to extrapolate, well, what would that look like? I think that would look like Crazy Town, tell you the truth. And I have to go back to something that might be attributed to Jacques Vallée.
Okay.
Which is the question of what are UFOs doing? And the obvious, what they're actually doing is they are eroding faith in science, religion, culture, belief, everything that is the cornerstone of civilization, and posing the question, this may not be true. So what is this? What am I?
That is a great question. And I like how you said that it's eroding, faith in science, eroding faith in religion, because it really is, a lot of these craft or these craft, they defy, our basic understanding of science, of physics. And it's like, I've never thought of it like that they're eroding our, eroding science.
Yeah. Now, it could just be that is the skill of manipulating perception. Because throughout the history of anomalous sightings, going back to ancient times, the culture was always able to describe these things in terms of what the culture knew about or believed. So, chariots of fire, Ezekiel's wheel, burning bushes, who knows? But today, culture is a bit different. So our associations are different. And we see things, in terms of artificial intelligence, which wasn't a thing at the time.
Yeah.
Computers weren't a thing at the time. But this is how we are leaning to describe this now. And I have to wonder, how are we going to be leaning to describe this in 100 years?
Great point.
I don't know. I do think that there is some manipulation going on. There is some memory, perception, thought manipulation that is part and parcel of the phenomenon.
Yeah, there is something that is called screen memories, and it is like putting a movie screen in front of you, so you remember something else than what really happened. It's so they call them screen memories, and this is brought up by my friend as well, Vicky Joy, and she goes in quite into depth about this.
Is that on the MK Ultra discussion?
No, actually, no. This is on abduction. This is on alien abductions, which is funny though, because I think MK Ultra has a tie-in with screen memories as well.
I think so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this is all conjecture. There is very little proof. The only evidence that I see is kind of the way the world is working right now.
Yeah.
Which from the perspective of a guy who's 72 years old, I may not be smarter than anybody else, but I've certainly got a little bit more perspective than somebody who's 30. So it's stuff like that stands out for me because it's so different than the way things were that I see the change. Whereas somebody a lot younger may not see the change.
Interesting take.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
That is a fantastic story, Don. And I know we're getting close to running out because I usually run for an hour here. Is there anything else you want to talk about here for the last maybe 10 minutes?
Well, I mean, out of all the things that we talked about, even over the phone,
yeah,
anything that you would care to suggest? I'm open. I'm open.
Well, the one subject that I'm intrigued in, something that I'm not sure if you're willing to talk about at all. Perhaps if you want to just explain a little bit about it, I would be, if you feel comfortable doing that, I would love to hear a little bit about that subject that we've talked about.
Oh, okay.
If you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I'd have to truncate it.
Yeah.
At this point, because it's so when I left Florida in December of March of 1972.
Mm-hmm.
And I came straight out to California. I had done a communication course in Scientology when I was in Florida. And it was just, the basic course. It was the first course. It was just communication drills. And on one of the drills, I had an out-of-body experience, a genuine, full-blown out-of-body experience. And I thought, oh, this is the shit. I got to check this out.
Yeah.
So that was the main reason I went to California in the first place, is to come out here and take some more classes, get involved. So I ended up actually joining the Sea Organization and spending the better part of 10 years at Celebrity Center in Los Angeles. And I was an auditor, which is kind of a counselor, the guy who runs processes, memory processes, that sort of thing. And then a little later, a case supervisor. And got to meet some pretty interesting people. Got to audit some pretty interesting people, some celebrities. And I got to see what was under the hood.
That's it. I find that intriguing. Yeah. Would you mind going into giving us the basics of what Scientology is about? Like, where was it derived? And what is Scientology?
Well, let me say first off that I left in 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And cut ties. So I'm no longer involved.
Yeah.
I don't get Christmas cards from them anymore. I don't actively shit talk them.
Yeah.
Because I realize that there are some really good people that really want answers and really want to better themselves and progress spiritually.
Yeah.
And to those people, okay, you'll come to your own conclusion at some point. But Scientology started out actually as Dianetics in the 50s. And Dianetics was basically very similar to regression. memory regression.
Okay.
So you would locate some incidents that were painful, setting, whatever, and there would be probably hundreds of them, and you would go down this memory chain. Revivifying the memory and in theory releasing any negative feelings or charge about it. And as a memory process, it was pretty effective because the guy who was running the session was doing it on a script. So there was no variable. The script was always the same. You knew what was coming. You knew what was in your head, and you knew how to dig deeper. So it eventually got into past lives, because if you keep going earlier and earlier and earlier, eventually you're going to hit a past life, and you're going to start revivifying memories from those things. Now, people do that. They all do that. And at first, it's very significant. And as time goes by and it happens more and more, it becomes less significant. And those personalities that you think you were, it's not important. You lose the significance of the importance of having been so and so, because that's not the point anymore. But Dianetics is a fairly long process. It could take months to do the whole Dianetic process thing, and then later on, he came up with Scientology, and Scientology was specifically to address the spirit.
Spirit aspect of it.
Right. So the things that would keep a spirit locked up in unknowns.
Okay.
And that's a very long process. Back in the 70s, there were 4 grades of Scientology. There was a power processing. There was an R6EW, which was the kind of the beginning of the clearing course to get to the clearing course. The clearing course was basically the elimination of the reactive mind. Right? So when a person achieved the state of clear, he was no longer mocking up things that would keep him in the dark.
Okay.
To put it simply.
Yeah.
After clear, there were 7 levels of OT, which is operating Thetan. Operating Thetan meaning basically a spirit unencumbered. In varying degrees by the physical.
Okay.
So in the early 70s, it went up to OT7 with the promise that there would be OT8, and OT8 was total cause over matter, energy, space, and time, subjective and objective. Yeah, that was on the grade chart. That was printed. That was promised.
That's quite the promise.
Yeah, it's quite the promise. So he didn't actually release that before he died. And, there are questions as to who actually wrote OT8 when it was released after his death. I don't know all the particulars on that one. You could research it. If you go to WikiLeaks, it's pretty much all there.
Okay.
So it was basically a process of spiritual enlightenment, if you will, until it turned into things that were kind of questionable, things that seem to have come out of Hubbard's case, his own head, his own recollection of what history looked like. And claiming that it was a universal experience, that all beings had these experiences, these specific experiences.
Okay.
So you would have to weigh that, and either you would go with it or you wouldn't. There were some things about it that were occultish. There were some things about it that smacked of magic and alchemy, and those were all things that he was involved in early on in life.
It's true. Yes.
So, I guess if you're looking for spiritual enlightenment, it's any port in a storm. And
whichever one is calling to you the brightest, I think you're right. When you're out searching and you see a bunch of lights, and whichever one shines the brightest to you personally, that's what gets you called in.
Yeah. It's it's a very personal thing, a very personal experience, and there are people that are still in, that were in when I was in, and that's sufficient for them.
And now I have a question. Now you're saying that you're investigating these memories. What about you with your UFO experience? How did that go? Did that play out at all? Did that come out?
It never came up once.
Wow. Oh,
Thousands of hours of auditing, thousands of hours of auditing, it never came up once.
Jeez, that's something. That is something. Then if this is a script and you know how it's supposed to play out, and you get you can work your way through, and you can find all these traumatic memories or these crazy memories, and for this one to be bypassed tells you a lot about what actually tells you more about that event than anything.
Yeah. I never even thought about it at the time. I never even stopped to think, hey, that never came up. Nothing.
When did that ever cross your mind though? Like years later, did that ever cross your mind? Like, that's crazy that never came up. Did that ever pop up into your mind then that's years later?
It didn't really come up until the mid 2000s.
Okay.
Fascinating. I never stopped to think about it. So yeah, that was particularly odd to consider that.
Yeah.
Because there were things came up. I have a pretty good memory as a result of being able to utilize that protocol.
Yeah.
I have a really good memory. And I've run things, that probably, I would say, as early as a few months old, where I clearly remember things.
Wow.
And that's, without any, reverie, without any concentration, just off the top of my head.
Just like that.
Right? So how did this thing get missed? How did this thing get no significance? I don't know, but I have to go back to the idea that it is possible to manipulate these things, and possibly for a reason that I cannot determine.
I agree. It's just another mystery that we need to uncover. Another curiosity.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So does that answer your?
That does, Don. That leaves us with a little bit of an insight, from a different perspective into Scientology a little bit, and who knows, maybe in the future we can go in further, have you on another time if you're open for that. But Don, I want to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience with me.
It was a pleasure, and I enjoyed it very much, and I hope everyone considers very carefully what I said, and don't believe everything I said just because I said it.
I think that's a great a great way to end this. And so, Don, I want to say thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. And the honor was mine.
Thank you very much, man.
All right, everyone. That was Don sharing his I don't want to say abduction, but almost near abduction, and his power to be able to refute the abduction, actually, to mentally, like he was saying, it's going both ways. He figured it was going both ways, so he was like, no. And he reversed it, in my opinion. He had the power to do that, which is really interesting, you know. Other people have been able to refute abductions or visitations, we'll say. But this is a different way that has been done as well. So I want to definitely say thank you to Don for joining me tonight. That was really interesting. And if you have had experience such as Don has, you know, send me an email, codex of curiosities at gmail.com. And, you know, we can talk about it. Even if you just need to talk about it and you don't want to come on the show, that is fine. I have some people who message me and let me know their experiences, and they're just not ready yet, which is fine. So if you need a place to come and talk, I am here to listen. And with that, you know, as the night is coming in, I just want to tell everybody, make sure you keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
I look forward to our next adventure together as we navigate the mysteries that lie ahead. Until our paths cross again, keep your curiosity wandering and ensure the light remains lit.